Will is getting ready to start another series of webinars, and if you didn't view the Epic of Opera, you've got to be in on this one because it's going to be opera in film, and that's a big topic, and it's a lot to cover. And so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to minimize myself and turn this over to Mr. Berger.
Oh, great. Okay, let me attempt to share the screen and make sure I've got that right. And then I can take it from there. And how are we doing? We okay?
We're okay. All great.
All right. I'm going to need to make myself a little bigger here so I don't, yeah. Okay, good enough. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us here and spending some of your summer weekend. I don't know, do weekends even matter anymore? But yeah, summer weekend with us. We are looking at this topic of, well, Terry and I were talking about different things, and I sort of said as topic suggestions, you know, I feel like we can't not talk about this issue, where we are with the Wagner polemic right now in terms of national and indeed global dialogues going on. We've been talking about some of these issues, racism in art. What do we do with it? Other problems in art. Do we cancel it out? Do we frame it in some way? Do we contextualize it? That a lot of people are talking about. So I thought, one, we have experience to offer everybody else in what we've been dealing with or should have been dealing with in most of our cases for what, a century and a half. But also, we've worked ourselves into something of a stalemate in our polemic, I think. I know when I talk about Wagner, which I do all over the place, both for the Metropolitan Opera and independently, sometimes we get stuck in the same issues. So looking at what people are talking about now, can we grow our discussion from that? In other words, what can the world learn from us? What can we learn from the world? So that's what I want to talk about. And I've got to say, it is absolutely, it's a very fraught subject. Like I was looking at, well, what are the most recent things that people have said? And in the last week, I was barraged on Google searches with a bunch of articles that I felt I needed to address. So I'm not going to solve the problem. You wouldn't want that anyway. I'm not going to cover what everybody has to say about this complex problem. I'm going to bring up some questions, and I think here's sort of some good news. It's not one of these kind of we're all going to die and there's no hope conversations. There actually is. We actually are at, I think, an important moment, but an important moment of opportunity for us as Wagner fans, I think we can say, and for everybody around us. So, to wit, you know, where did we come from? How did we get here? We have to look at that a little bit as Wagnerians, as Americans. How is this moment different from what went before it? Haven't we been talking about this forever? Well, it is different. And how so? Well, a lot of things that were acceptable or barely acceptable, or at least explainable away, I don't know if that's certainly not good English, but you get the idea, might not be. And I mean, things that were barely acceptable a year ago might not be. Things that we could say about why we were advocating for Wagner might not do it anymore. And this happens. Times change. Things change under the problem, right? I'm thinking of if we have any Gilbert and Sullivan fans out there who we'll come back to in a bit. But of course, in the Mikado, Gilbert wrote a use of the N-word that very quickly in the United States, producers were saying 130 years ago, I'm sorry, we cannot do this. We need to change this. And much of the debate that we have went on then, like, whoa, can we change something that an artist did? Or are these just current notions? Or what did Gilbert mean and all this? And it was an interesting discussion, but the upshot, even in 1890, was, I'm sorry, in this country, it is just not possible. Imagine, even then. So we evolved. We changed the word. We didn't have to cancel the Mikado or Gilbert. That was one case. Time changed underneath it. We, as Wagner fans, have been struggling with the most complex and most toxic artist in history this whole time. At least the one that people have decided is the most toxic. And let's face it, not without reason. I'm hearing a bunch of sound. Is this okay? Are we on a good sound level here? Anyone?
How about now? Okay.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, I just want to make sure. I am talking out there. Right, okay. What we have, us who are here now, is experience with the subject of a problem that won't go away. A wound that won't heal, if you will. We know a little bit about what points of view will simply not fix the problem, which solutions will work for a while, but only a little, and also the frustration of being stuck in one place in an endless debate. We like this art. We want to like it. We don't want to be stigmatized as something contemptible for liking it. We want to like it more. And let's face facts. We need people to support it in order to pay for it so we can keep liking it, right? I keep waiting, and I've been waiting since I was a teenager, to wake up one morning, Kafkaesque, and find that I have magically turned into a Nazi, because I must have, because this art speaks to me so deeply. Well, I'm pushing 60 now, and I still haven't magically turned into a Nazi or a totalitarian or a racist or any more of a racist than I am systemically. So, what's happening here? Let me move to another slide. Wagnerian toxicity, let's describe it, exists in three places. In the biography of the person, in his highly problematic and massive, if you probably know, prose writings, and, as many people say, in the works themselves. Now that's where the problem resonates most clearly, because those previous two places are dead, literally or figuratively. We only care about them because of what is alive, which is the operas, and yes, they are operas, and more on that later. Those are living organisms, and that's why they evolve in various performances and productions, and that's why we argue about productions and singers so much, because those are the living aspects of these works. So let's outline some of how the problem of Wagner exists in two of these works, only two, and very briefly, of course, because, it's a massive subject. I just like this picture because this is a California sculptor making a bust of Wagner. And of course, we have the whole issue of, well, is it a monument? What is the right monument for an artist? Is it a sculpture or a bronze sculpture or what? So, no. Moving on. The Ring. The Ring of the Nibelungen. Is The Ring an essentially, in its core essence, racist work? Yes, it is. You are all old enough to know this. And the more you dig into it and its sources, the clearer the racial issues and Wagner's handling of them becomes. A struggle of races is what The Ring is about. Note all those confusing references to race, Geschlecht, and other words, when referring to as few as two individuals, Siegmund and Sieglinde, Fafner and Fasolt, Gunther and Gutrune, and others throughout the whole Ring. The Ring is based on separate but tenuously related myths from the age of migrations around the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. And the 19th century understood that prehistory as rather more monolithic than we do now, right? I mean, they understood that a group of people from Central Asia expanded out in several directions and conquered others. The way they got it, kind of completely or all but completely eliminating those lesser loser races when they took over. These were the much touted Aryans, blonde and fair-skinned warriors. And the less they mixed with the inferiors, the more they mixed only with each other, Siegmund and Sieglinde, the purer they were. It's kind of like, did you ever play the board game Risk? Like, remember that one? You move all your little blue pieces into Kamchatka or wherever and push the other people entirely out. That's how they thought it worked. Bam, it's an epic of race in its core. Is it an essentially anti-Semitic work? Yes and no. Yes, in its racism and purity-based hierarchical notions of race, the Aryans on top, and the Semites, therefore, not. And no, it is not an inherently anti-Semitic work because it is non-specifically aimed directly at Jews who did not exist in the world of the Ring except in code. But see, this is what I've learned about racism, and I've learned it in the last couple of years, and I've learned it from pondering Wagner. The objective specificity of it is irrelevant. Racism thrives, I've got bugs here, racism thrives in the process of excluding one group after another. In other words, it doesn't matter if Wagner says Alberich, for example, is the eternal Jew, because the Ring obsessing on Alberich, obsessing about hating the happy superiors, that alone is sufficient to spell trouble for anyone who is not of the lordly race, the Herrenmenschen, descended from the gods. So you'll never get rid of Alberich, even if you kill him off. And we all know that we don't know what happens to Alberich in the Ring. We know every other character, even the Norns, we know what happens to them, but not Alberich. And even if we did know, even if they killed him off like Hagen, the Ring is a cycle, right? So another Alberich will come and try to take our jobs and rape our virgin daughters in the Rhine River and steal our gold and plot our downfall just out of spite and lovelessness. And if that sounds like the language of extreme racism today, good, you're paying attention. And we can't not say that. The gods and their descendants, or those who perceive themselves as such, keep having to fear Alberich, either in his memory or the idea of the Alberich to come, because racism has to keep excluding. After each race has been excluded, or else it can't exist. It cannot justify its purity-based core policy. There is no final solution, as the Third Reich discovered to its own dismay and collapse. This problem, is not literal in the libretto. It is latent within it. It is coded within it, but it's there. It was created as an epic about races, which epics tend to be, since they're about the founding of a new order of people, like the Aeneid, the Lusiads, more on the Aeneid in a moment, Orlando Furioso, How the West Was Won, Star Wars. Like the N-word in the Mikado, subsequent history took a racial problem that was problematic enough to begin with and made it worse. The barely allowable became unacceptable through the process of time. All right, what about Meistersinger? Well, in this opera, you have an entirely different framing of the racial situation because you're dealing with some level of historical realism rather than mythology, a problem that Wieland Wagner, of all people, cited when he, of all people, created a very romantic staging of the work. I believe that's 1958, but it's his production in Bayreuth. But he had a point. When you're dealing with a historical figure in a specific time and place, very specific, you have to deal with it differently than mythology. And Die Meistersinger is very specific. It brings it into realism. It's, what is Act 1? It's Vespers on June 23rd, 1558, which we know from between Hans Sachs's widowhoods, in the Katharinenkirche in Nuremberg. Bam, realism. It's, think of Tosca, think of Puccini's Tosca, right? The first chapel on the right of the church of Sant'Andrea della Valle in Piazza Navona in Rome at noon, the time of the Angelus, June 17th, 1800. Bam, reality, as opposed to The Ring. Back then, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Two different things, right? Realism thrives on specificity. And it's really interesting because I think we're living in a 1558 moment right now. We have the whole nation and beyond in this wrenching moment of saying, who are we? What are we all about? How do we recognize who we are? How do we recognize it in our singing? How do we sing about it? How do we recognize it in our architecture? In the buildings that are around us, the unchanging part of the environment, including the places where we meet to sing. You know, the Church of St. Catherine, the Katharinenkirche, was not a random picturesque choice for Wagner. It existed in 1558, but that wasn't where the Meistersingers met in 1558. They didn't meet in the Katharinenkirche until 1619. I don't know where they met in 1558, but I do not believe that Wagner got that wrong, or that he got that wrong by accident. I believe he deliberately made it wrong because he wanted to use the Katharinenkirche for Act 1 of Meistersinger. And right now I'm thinking of Schiller and his Mary Stuart, which of course has, you know, sets off all these versions of the Mary Queen of Scots legend as opposed to history, meeting up with Queen Elizabeth of England and having this great confrontation right into the movies, right? And of course in Donizetti and elsewhere. And of course it never happened. I know there's some recent scholarship saying it might have, which is also very interesting, but we have no evidence in history that that ever happened. And by the way, that's just after 1558. What is that, 1570 or something? And Schiller, that's the point of Schiller's drama. It's wrong, it's right. No, it's not right. It's true because it's wrong. And also Schiller, do we have any Verdi Don Carlo fans here? Schiller, of course, wrote Don Carlos, which also, interestingly, takes place in 1558. And the history is deliberately wrong in order to tell a true story. And there's that line. I don't know. I should look. It's right on the shelf. But I don't know if it's in Schiller. I imagine it is. But there's that line in the opera where the Princess Eboli is making small talk with the Marquis de Posa. And she says, so tell me, what's going on in elegant Paris right now? And Posa says, oh, they say the king is going to take part in a tournament. And la ha ha, dun, 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 and off they go. And everybody knew in the opera and all over the place that the king, Henry II, died in the tournament that happened when they were celebrating the peace treaty that we saw in Act One. The treaty, I can't ever say it right, Cateau-Cambrensis or whatever, after the Battle of Saint-Quentin and the peace treaty, and the king, Henry II, Elizabeth de Valois' father, celebrated in this great juste and got killed with a lance through the eye. And in fact, there is a plaque of it in Paris where he died. And people on the way to the Paris Opera to see Verdi's Don Carlos would have seen the plaque and then heard it's weird. Why is it even there? It's not even relevant to the plot. It's there to make it wrong to be true. And what happened in the Katharinenkirche, that I think Wagner, did the same thing with, is a lot. This is, it was one of the first churches in Nuremberg, I think it was 1525 or 26, to define itself as Lutheran, as non-Roman, along with the larger St. Sibyl that you might know if you ever go there. It's beautiful. And yet the Katharinenkirche did not permit the wholesale iconoclasm that accompanied the Lutheranization, let's say, of the other churches in Nuremberg and elsewhere. In other words, it preserved much of the art that the people had installed there in tombs and commemorative windows. The people, the folk, had installed there, not art that had been imposed by Rome, but that had been created by the people, from the bottom up, as it were. And yet it became this hotbed of Lutheran thought, and it was the best of both worlds in Wagner's idea. It was old and new, it was tradition and innovation. It was Hans Sachs, in theory. Of course, it then got bombed to smithereens in the war because that's what happened, and it's been left like that. So that's why we have this picture on the right. Now, of course, so that sounds like a great sublime thing Wagner's trying to pull in Meistersinger, and it is, except it's Wagner. So when he does so in a typically toxic way. The problem with Meistersinger, and you know where I'm all going with this, the problem with Meistersinger is not what people think the problem is. The problem is not that one line in the final monologue of Ehrt eure deutschen Meister, obey your German masters. Master? Is that plural? Deutschen? Anyway, we always translate it as obey your German masters, which is not at all what that line means. But every time I do a panel discussion or anything on this subject, on Meistersinger, that's where it stops. That's what the whole topic becomes about, is that line. And of course, that line we know means honor Ehrt, honor as you would your mother and father, as the commandments tell us. It means follow your German teachers, Meister is teacher, but subsequent history, like the N-word in the Mikado, has made it absolutely, people can't get past it. But that's not the problem with Meistersinger. The problem with Meistersinger is the inherent need for a bad guy and bad guys in order to create a national identity. Like The Ring, but in much more concrete terms. And that's what Wagner's trying to do in Meistersinger, is create a German national identity for his own purposes of 1867. But because he just can't see it another way, Verdi could for his nation, but Wagner could not. He could not see Herrenmenschen without Untermenschen. And I don't just mean Beckmesser. Beckmesser's just as great as the role can be. It's kind of lame dramaturgy, but beyond Beckmesser, there's the whole Welcher thing, which I could go off on for an hour. The foreigners are out to get us culturally, which he was not wrong in 1558. And that's another whole subject about, sort of Italian and French models for German art were wrong, or it was wrong for Germans to be enslaved to them. But he goes on, of course, as he always says, even now, he says in the monologue, they're lining up to get us. And that paranoia that is necessary for Wagner to feel any pride in being German permeates the whole thing. That same final monologue tells us, of course, it speaks that Heilige Römische Reich, the whole dies, but Heilige Deutsche Kunst endures. The Holy Roman Empire will pass, but Holy German art, moving from Roman to German, will endure. That is either a sublime definition of the word Reich or a really awful definition of the word Kunst, or both. But in either case, it requires, on our part, a good hard look. The Meistersingers famously say, "Hier gilt der Kunst." Art is what matters here. And both Siegfried and Wieland Wagner quoted that line famously and put it up in one case on a sign in reopening the Bayreuth Festival House after both World War I and World War II. Art is what matters here. But saying that does not end the problem if you're going to equate art with Kunst, as Wagner taught us to do. In other words, you can't just say it's just art, it's not politics. You can't. Wagner taught us that you can't. And you know what? Ultimately, that's good news. Ultimately, that's going to give us a bigger rather than smaller understanding of Kunst, of art. And I'll get to that. So how can we like these things? How can we support them if they are toxic? I'm going to tell a little story here. A personal story. Very name-droppy. Okay, so when I published my first book, which was on Wagner, I got invited to my first ever New York literary brunch for blood. Like, can you imagine what that is? Like, just, you call the host and say, "What can I bring?" And the answer is a knife, and a sharp one, because it's going to be like that. Okay, so I'm at this and completely new to this whole world. And I'm online at the buffet, and there's a nice lady in front of me also waiting to get stuff at the buffet. And our host comes up and says to me, "Will, you know Susan Sontag, right?" And she turns around and the host says, "Susan, Will just wrote a book on Wagner. Oh, I'm needed in the kitchen." And he runs off, right? And they're like, "Yikes, I'm not ready for this." And, she turned around, she was fine, of course, but I remember her turning around like, as my grandfather used to say in Mexico, como un toro abandeado, like a bull in the bull ring. And she said, "How can you do that?" And I was stunned. I said, "Well, I felt like I couldn't not do it." And she said, "Do you feel that art is redeemable if the creator of the art is inherently immoral?" And I said, "Yes, but it's not as easy as people would think." And meanwhile, like, this other guy came up and said, "Well, morality is relative." And she told him to, "Excuse me, but get the F away." And then she said, "Well, Plato thought that it wasn't possible. So can you think better than Plato?" And I said, "No. And if Plato said this, it's up to us to take that very seriously. But I'm in a different place than Plato. And I'm dealing with a lot more centuries of past literature than Plato was. And I have to find a way to make it work." And she liked that. And we went on and talked about other things. And later there was another panel discussion, and I was invited to join and address this subject with her and other people. And I never got to an answer, and I never got to an answer that she liked, but I engaged with the question. And I realized that's what she wanted, and that's when I realized she actually was a great philosopher. Plus, I love that story. But it brings up that we need to ask ourselves. How can we say these works are true if they are so wrong? And the part of the answer to that is because the truths that we cull from experiencing these works are not literal truths. They are literally not literal. They're not in the libretto. They're not the eternal truths of renewal of cosmos and community, the Ring and Meistersinger, are only attainable through the entire experience of the works. Yes, truth. I keep telling people you don't come to the opera for the pretty music. There are easier ways to experience pretty music certainly than attending a performance of Meistersinger. Dante. Dante is my core thing, my core interest. The Divine Comedy. He was wrong about the sun being in the center of our galaxy in the Paradiso. He was wrong about the Mount of Purgatory being at the South Pole. He was right about a lot of other things that you had to have that cosmography to get to. He was right about a lot of things that are harder to grasp than things you can get on Google Maps, including some science. There's been some scholarship, and I've slogged through it, about how the cosmographic details of the Paradiso prefigured and uniquely prefigured Einstein and relativity. Dante's space was curved 600 years before anyone else's, even if its center was in the wrong place, the sun. Like Schiller and the others, he was true by being wrong. The Aeneid. The Aeneid's important for us because this is interesting. It was written with the express purpose of enshrining the divinely mandated mission of the Roman Empire to dominate the world. This is a notion that does not interest us, if it does, only in a negative way. So what do we do with the Aeneid? Do we cancel it? Many have, by sheer neglect. I don't, and I haven't, and I don't think we need to. But we need to read it in a different way than Augustus read it. We need to. Or else, frankly, it's a lame political tract and it's a crashing bore. But if we read it as something bigger, if we say, no, wait, there's got to be something bigger going on here than a historical moment of Augustus Caesar, a bigger moment than Caesar or even Virgil could have conceived, even Virgil who wrote it, then it absolutely rings forth as amazingly true today, and it does. So how do we get there? Well, the world is struggling with a lot of things. First of all, is it only race? Is it not gender as well? It is. And I have a friend, a rabbi, in fact, who's an opera fan, who says if we cared about gender issues as much as we care about race issues, or say we do, the magic flute would be unperformable. I tend to agree. We have Gone with the Wind, of course, which people have been discussing. Hattie McDaniel discussed it in her time. Like, how did she feel about getting an Oscar for that portrayal? And, she had a lot to say about that. I've been following the Lady Antebellum thing of changing their name. Okay, that didn't go too well, but at least they thought, oh gosh, I guess we need to. And my idea was like, really? You just figured that out? Like when you came out, thought, what is with that name? But what was problematic became untenable at a certain point because time changed under it. What is not good enough anymore? What has been tried that won't work? Well, canceling out entirely. I mean, Wagner's just not going away. I think 50 years ago, a lot of people assumed it sort of would. But we're here to tell them it's not. What else isn't tenable anymore? Well, trivializing the problem. That's something that we have done. We've all done it as Wagner fans in all little ways. Well, it doesn't bother me. I'm Jewish, or I'm black, or I'm not Aryan, or whatever, and I like Wagner. Okay, that's a start. I'm here for the art. Hier gilt der Kunst. No, because also, my grandfather used to say from Mexico's, No hay ética sin estética. And I love that in Spanish because it works both ways. There's no ethic without an aesthetic, but it's also every aesthetic has an ethic to it. What do we do? Is there a way out? Well, there must be. Um, there are partial ways. Of course, it was very controversial to have race-blind casting in Wagner. Terry mentioned Tannhäuser before, and we all remember Die Schwarze Venus of Grace Bumbry at Bayreuth. That was the year I was born, 1961. But it's still an issue, as is blackface in opera. And it's interesting because it's a different issue for different people depending on where they are. Famously, Anna Netrebko is saying, I don't understand the problem in Aida. And we have been telling her in America, well, we do. And you're just going to have to trust us on this one. That what might be possible in Russia is not possible in America or something. It's evolutionary. The solution is evolutionary. Toscanini claiming the mantle of Wagner away from the Third Reich, the famous anti-fascist Toscanini, and saying, no, I will be the chief Wagnerian here, not Richard Strauss. And that was something, but it didn't solve the problem. James Levine conducting the Jesus out of the ring in Bayreuth, which I've seen, as a Jewish man, that was good, but it didn't end the problem. So what do we do now? Or what do we have to do now that won't end it and won't solve it, but will move it on to its next point? Well, it's interesting. Here's a couple of things. This is when I said I looked up some things going on, and just in the last week I came up with these two. The actor Idris Elba was saying, go to this interview in IndieWire on July 15th, that he thought works like Gone with the Wind, Othello and Otello both, I suppose, and more, might need some form of warning labels on them. And I thought that was interesting. But, excuse me, I got excited. What was important was he was saying, oh no, we still perform them. But they need what a lot of people talk about, they need contextualization. It is irresponsible to present them without contextualization. I don't know if a warning label per se will do, but maybe. Morris Robinson, great singer of today, American, and I interviewed him on my webinar, and he was full of interesting things to say. And he just did a Q&A with Opera Wire, also just this month, just a few days ago. Go to it, because the upshot of what he said from his perspective as a Black American, of someone who has been performing in Porgy and Bess, which is an issue, which has a whole bunch of issues, absolute masterpiece that I need to experience all the time, but brings up a lot of questions. As he said, the problem, he kept stressing the systemic nature of the problem. And that if you have works of art that are presented by institutions that are systemically racist, and that doesn't mean that the people in them are acting in a racist way. It means that they are limited in scope to the point of view of one race at the expense of the others. In other words, if you have an all-white board of directors and upper management, then presenting any work will give it a point of view that is not, that needs to be worked on. We need a better point of view. And I thought that was interesting, because I thought that made me think, all right, so the solutions are systemic. That to say that the problem is systemic for so many people in so many situations is a way of saying, I can't deal with the problem because it's too big. But it made me think we can think systemically, we who are involved in the problem. So that love the art and hate the artist won't do anymore. You and I have struggled for a century and a half, metaphorically, to redefine the artist in question to no avail. So maybe we're not looking at the problem systemically, and maybe there's a way, and I think there is. Maybe we need to rethink what we mean by art. Maybe we need to rethink the place of art in our world. If hier gilt der Kunst, if we're going to make that work, then was ist der Kunst? What if we begin the process to try and understand art the way we understand other forms of intellectual history, as morally neutral, but still imperative to study? And that sounds like, well, all right, fine. No, that's a big leap from where we are now in America, in Protestant-defined America, and I'm talking about how you read a text, not how you worship. It's a big leap, but we can do it. We do it with intellectual history, barely, but we do it. We do it with Freud. We do it with Confucius, with Hobbes. We can study these things. Machiavelli is his own case. Okay, with Durkheim, Einstein to a certain point. It's not, we don't look at the morality of relativity or of Einstein, which as far as I know is fine. I don't know. But it doesn't even enter into the subject. We need to study relativity. We do it to a certain extent with Dante and Virgil, as much as we study Dante and Virgil, which is not enough. We do it somewhat with Shakespeare. I'm thinking of The Merchant of Venice and Taming of the Shrew, of course. We find a way to look at this in a context and say this is not a format for how society should be, but it's a study in how some people are or how some people play out. Now, admittedly, it is not possible to do that with new art and living artists in the same way. If I buy a ticket to a Slayer concert, and I did for every Slayer concert up until the final farewell, and they're saying a bunch of idiocy that I don't like, and they did for 35 years, I have to address that in a different way. I have to respond to that in the present, in the here and now, in a more belligerent and confrontational way. Contextualizing it won't work. I have to say, yo, shut up, or something. I don't know. I have to address that. I have to have a different response than I have to at a Wagner performance, because I'm actually giving them my money and supporting them. And that's a way of saying, I agree with your vision of how the rest of the world should be. Just like in 1876, when you supported Wagner, you were supporting that vision of opera and etica and estetica and all that. But maybe that tells us something. Maybe that's why art, by definition, takes place in the past. Maybe that's why we keep arguing about art versus pop culture, and you know half of you just did. Why are you bringing up Slayer right now? You must have thought when I did. That's not art. Well, in a way, correct, because we think of art as only in the past, and we argue vehemently about that. Maybe that's why art always seems like it stopped at a certain point. And again, I'm thinking of Gilbert. Any Patience fans here? His parody, or was it an homage, of Oscar Wilde in Patience? Says he has Oscar Wilde saying, "Of course you will poo-poo whatever's fresh and new and declare it's crude and mean, for art stopped short in the cultivated court of the Empress Josephine." Great line. Maybe we need to separate artist worship from hero worship, like we do with great thinkers. And this is part of the problem of, are Confederate monuments heritage or history or what? Well, they're not. They're civic religion. And we managed to do it. Stonewall Jackson at Chancellorsville will be studied for all times by military tacticians. It's an entire course at Sandhurst. There's no question about that. A statue of him in the Virginia State Capitol on the street is not studying his tactics at Chancellorsville. It's civic religion. They're two different things. And yes, there are statues of Richard Wagner, as I showed in the picture, and there are plenty in Germany, and there are issues, and people are questioning whether we need busts of Richard Wagner in universities. And okay, that's a whole subject, and I started putting the notes into that in here, and it took an hour, and so I have to lose. That's separate. What our problem is here is that there's a barrier to thinking about art as intellectual history. Very few people, any art, but especially opera, very few people, either in the opera world or beyond, are ready to think of opera as intellectual history. Not even Wagner. That's why he kept saying, well, these aren't operas, they're music dramas. Like, what the hell difference does that make? You know, Philip Glass recently at the Met, we were interviewing him, and said, you know, he defines opera as that which is performed in an opera house. And I thought that's as good as any. His problem, Wagner's problem, not Philip Glass's problem, Wagner's problem was that he too thought of opera as intellectually lightweight, other people's opera, the pop culture of his day, Donizetti and Meyerbeer specifically. And this is a common error we all participate in today, largely because of Wagner and what he kept telling us, the trash he kept saying about Donizetti and Meyerbeer, and the word he used wasn't trash. We have to consider that Wagner's total package, his Gesamtkunstwerken, the whole Gesamtkunstwerk of Wagner's corpus, his operas, are works of intellectual history. And that includes the music, even more than the words, because the story, the logos, doesn't translate into words in this case. It translates into the Gesamtkunstwerk, which we care about because of the music. Now, full stop, time out. I don't want anyone sending a question saying that I am saying that the music justifies the politics. I am not. I will never say that. And I will slice you if you say I'm saying that. I'm saying that the music is the politics for our purposes, not exclusive of the words, not exclusive of the prose writings, explaining it and the productions and the propaganda as part of it. But the biggest part of it, the music, is why we're still dealing with these works. And it's not only Wagner, it's all opera. All good opera anyway. The music tells the logos, the story. I gave a presentation at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, imagine, about Don Giovanni in the time of Me Too, Mozart's Don Giovanni. And they asked me, can we still do Don Giovanni? And my answer was, could we ever? Not without, like Lady Antebellum, not without contextualization. And the contextualization of Don Giovanni is to look deeper than reading the synopsis or quoting the one line mille tre, 1,003 sexual encounters in Spain alone. And of course, if you take the whole journey, you can see plainly there that Don Giovanni is this profound work of philosophy, one of the greatest. But you have to take the full journey in a live performance, a complete performance, not snippets for TV commercials or movie soundtracks for the Luftwaffe flying over Poland. No. Here in San Francisco, there in San Francisco, I was able to interview for the opera Amy Tan and David Henry Huang about their experience as Asian Americans with Turandot and Madame Butterfly, both of which were being presented by San Francisco Opera. And two things. One, I was so grateful to San Francisco Opera for allowing me to interview them and ask them, okay, New, what do you have to say about that? Not what do I think you should think about it, but what do you have to say? And I was so grateful. And two, I learned a lot, including that, well, those two operas are two completely different cases because they're fairy tale versus realism, like The Ring versus Meistersinger. But in both cases, the score told the complete story. Butterfly, for example, is a passive victim in the synopsis, but she's the victor in the score. Her music at the finale. bum 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 bum. She wins. She's dead, but this is opera. It's not reality. I've said the same thing in print about Brunhilde recently. Siegmund and Sieglinde's incest has both literal and symbolic meaning. It's both racial and psychological, missing halves. In that way of literal and symbolic, Brunhilde's suicide is much more than yet another heroine sacrificing herself for the sake of, in this case, a literally stupid tenor, although it is that. But we have the world's longest aria at the end of the world's longest opera, to show us that she's nobody's victim, but in fact she is the only capable agent of evolution in the universe. That's not how passive victims kill themselves. So what's good and what are the opportunities here? That's the sort of systemic thinking we can start to advocate for. Beyond warning labels. We can have warning labels, but if we have warning labels, I hope they direct us to resources to look deeper into the problematic issues. Please read this article. Please attend this town hall discussion, panel discussion, town hall, I don't care, all of it, so on and so forth. We can let opera companies know that such things as those public forums on these issues in these works, because there are issues in these works, are not nerdy or unsexy or tedious or elitist or wonky or anything else. They're absolutely crucial and we want more of them. And as Morris Robinson pointed out, they're starting to listen to us. San Francisco, of course, but even the Met, such as, I mean, right now we're in a weird time, of course, but yes, starting to address these things. Did with Porgy and Bess in a small way. We need to do more. But we need to let them know that that's cool, that we like it, because they pay attention to that. But beyond the opera companies, because if we're going to talk systemically, we have to talk beyond the music business. We can let media know, this is a big one with me. Arts are not an afterthought. This has always driven me crazy. I'm here in New York, right? And in New York, the august New York Times explains it all for you. And we have in the New York Times, you know, the arts and leisure section. And I have questioned, I've written letters, and I've asked people, why is it arts and leisure? Why are you putting it in section C, I think it is, after everything else, after politics? And I had this problem when I worked in a radio station, largest public radio station, WNYC. There was the news section and the music section. And there was this pervading idea that like the grown-ups and the real men were in the news section and the music was nice. That's pretty stuff. No. What if instead of arts and leisure, and I know that we have in the Latin roots, we have otium and negotium and all that, but otium, leisure in Latin was not, that included study. Leisure was not like conspicuous consumption of Broadway tickets to show who you were in your leisure time. It meant something else. Why can't it now? Why isn't it arts and ideas? Why isn't investing in automobiles and real estate, everything else you do in your free time after you've done the real grown-up work of thinking about the human questions that are thrown in our face by art? The Athenians knew that. The Athenians knew that discussion and debate about the arts was an inherent part of the arts, which were an inherent part of democracy. You couldn't have democracy without this, as this was part of the form of where things got worked out. These are the Athenians with their art, who supposedly, according to Nietzsche, were the original inspiration for daring des Nibelungen, right? The birth of tragedy. And that that counted more for making your state great than economic policy or even military policy. You know, Athens lost the war with Sparta. But we don't remember Sparta as the golden age. We remember Athens, and correctly so. They lost the war, but they won the thought war. Athens continued because they understood a rather marvelous equation of Reich and Kunst, and both were Heilige. And I think we can advocate for that systemically. And I think that's a good place for me to be quiet here. Or not be quiet, but to end the TED Talk. Terry, what do you think? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Will.
Okay. Hi.
Yeah, I'm just playing with the controls.
I had this rough moment of thinking, oh my God, what if I was talking for an hour and the sound wasn't on?
No, it was on, and there were some problems because there was a technical problem trying to make Will bigger, and Emma was furiously typing away in the other room, and people were complaining about keyboard noise. So we got that dealt with. And
I was one of the people complaining. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah,
Make it
and
bigger.
also,
I think. Okay.
Right, and also Will's running his air conditioner because it's absolutely hot as can be in New York, and that's what the humming noise is. So, but it's okay. It's okay. It didn't eliminate any of your wonderful thoughts and so on.
Great.
So we've got some questions coming in now. So I will go ahead and throw some of them at Will, and please use Q&A for your questions and not use chat, please. Dahlia Geffen from Boston, president and founder of the Boston Wagner Society, says, I think of Sigmund and Sieglinde not as a superior race, but a more enlightened beings because they are half-gods. Sigmund shows tremendous compassion as opposed to the primitive tribal world he finds himself in, and that superior is a way of being, but it's not based on race. Thank you, Dahlia. Will, take it away.
I agree that is absolutely the way I see it, so that I can get a message from them. We love Sigmund and Sieglinde, almost uniquely in the ring. There aren't a lot of.
Yes, we do.
They're the two you're supposed to like the most. I mean, Brunhilde, yeah, but she's something else.
The two kids at the drive-in movie in the back seat.
Absolutely. I mean, hello, that Act One. Come on.
Hotter than hot.
But the idea of them as proponents of the Aryan, of the imaginary Aryan race, conquering lesser races, is inherent both in the myth, again, not in a quite the same toxic way that sounds to us, but it was there, and it certainly was there in Wagner's understanding of those myths. And Dahlia, you know, we were talking about the whole thing of the sword, the technology of the sword, that Siegmund doesn't quite get it right, but Siegfried does. And Siegfried is genetically the same as Siegmund. So, but anyway, the technology of the sword is part of the sort of pseudo-history of it, that the conquering races had better sword technology and water-quenched blacksmithing, water-quenched steel for swords, that this was part of the superiority of the Aryan race. All that was there. It's not emphasized by Wagner, and I don't think Wagner needed that aspect to tell the story he was telling. It's latent in it. It's there in Count Gobineau, the big racist who influenced Wagner, who will go on about it. But I think the reason that, like you, I see Sigmund and Sieglinde as enlightened beings rather than racially superior beings is because Wagner too was taking this stuff, and he may have been racist, and the mythology was, but that wasn't the story he was telling about, like, because he would have said it. Look at these, the Aryans are here, and they're kicking everyone, they're kicking the Vendels. Who were they kicking there? The Vendels, I think. But that's not what's important. That's not what turns out to be important about that. And he might not have even known that. Like with Virgil, we can know what he didn't even know about it from our perspective.
That's a great one. We got a question from Michael Kalkstein. Thank you, Michael. He said, this has been a terrific presentation, fascinating and deep, wants to know if he can get a copy or listen again. And we're working on that, Michael. We got thrown into this Zoom webinar world and jumped in feet first, and this is our third one. We're working on the learning curve there. We do archive them. It's a matter of getting them over to the platform. And I spent all week working on the next 2 programs, and it all takes time. So, but they will be put up. We're going to put them up on Vimeo, and that'll be soon. So thank you for the question too. It's important. I mean, this is a one-off deal. We had a lot of people sign up. Not all of them joined the webinar, but it will be available. And a couple people asked 20 minutes before the webinar started. Unfortunately, I probably could have helped them if I was at home. However, the power is shut off at my house, not because I didn't pay, but we had a power outage that's going to go on for another hour. So I had to run over to Emma's house. Thank God she has a setup for electronics here, and we're both working here. Me not in my normal environment. So thank you on that. As nobody else has any questions for Will, I can scarcely believe it.
I have questions for myself.
Oh, yeah, it's a huge topic, and there's always a lot of questions that come up about it. You know, are they portraying Beckmesser as being Jewish and all this? I mean, it's crazy making some of the stuff that comes up in these conversations.
Well, yeah.
And race and equity is becoming a huge concern now in the opera world. I mean, San Francisco just hired a person to have be the diversity, equity, and community director to make sure that everything reflects the community that we live in and its diversity. And in the Bay Area, that's huge.
Yes, so did the Met, and what they don't know is I have a ton of issues to bring to that department that they probably didn't even anticipate were issues, like in things that I've had in scripts that have been edited or whatever, and it's like, no, I don't want to say this, and this is why, and so on and so forth. And whenever I brought it up in the past, I can understand this from management's point of view. Not whenever, but often it's been like, you're being a troublemaker. And I can understand when you're trying to get something through the editorial process on a deadline, you really don't need some former UC Santa Cruz banana slug finding the non-diversity issue in it. But here we are. So, and as the kind of token part Jewish, Hispanic, vegetarian, I'm going to be offended at some point. So just hold on to your hats.
We've got one question that came in from Margaret Jones. Thank you, Margaret. And Margaret says, one of the joys of opera is studying the relevant history and context. Yes. And I have seen a lot of contemporary opera, such as Malcolm X, but among the arts, I think it is hard to wrestle with the ideas and present them in an opera. The Voyage and Marco Polo have these notes in the program to explain them, but ultimately you are seeing the performance, and it might not answer all those questions. So maybe your thoughts on that, Will?
I love that. I love that, and that's a big interest to me, because where you are in relation to the historicity of the subject changes the subject and changes your relationship to it and how you can present it. In general, when I like new operas, I like them when they address, usually through music, but also through production, the issues that are below the text. And you can do that with biography operas, but it's really hard. And you can do that with great new plays, but it's even harder. New, an opera new includes, The Crucible. But so when you had, I love The Voyage because it wasn't about the Queen said to Columbus, and then Columbus did this, and then landed there, and all this stuff happened. That wasn't the subject of that opera. The subject was about kind of being lost at sea. And that was phenomenal to me. I don't know if you've seen L'amour de loin, which is exactly not a headline opera, but it has some historicity to it. It has a historical basis in the time of the Crusades, but it's not. It's completely about a spiritual journey, and that's why it worked for me. But I think something like Malcolm X probably needed, you're right, contextualization. A lot of it comes through performance, but a lot of it doesn't. I don't know, but we got to do something with it. I'm not sure that there were problems with X, though, in what you got out of the performance. In other words, that the performance itself failed to contextualize the problematic issues in there. I don't think it did. I think everything came through in the performance. It may not have come through in other ways as an opera, but I think it's the upshot of my answer, which is not much of an answer, is that definitely new operas need to be contextualized and experienced in a different way than old operas about old subjects.
We have a question from one of my good friends, a member of our society, Jose Padilla, who's coming to us from Mexico.
Good Spanish there, Teresa.
Yes. Well,
Órale.
yeah. Jose asks, do you foresee issues with opera houses dealing with racism inside the operas? Everyone now might be offended by virtually everything. And I wanted to also mention too, thank you, Jose, that one of our former Adler Fellows and through the Merrill program and guest singer in San Francisco, Kenneth Kellogg, was the star of this new opera, Blue, which talks about racism and police activity and so on and so forth. And it was supposed to have another performance, I think. I'm not sure whether it's DC or where it was, but it was a tough thing for him, and he lives that. He lives it as a Black man and as a Black singer. And he was also in the Champion, the one about Emil Griffith. So maybe you could segue the two of these, my comments and Jose's question. Thank you, Jose.
Can you repeat Jose's question?
Do you foresee issues with opera houses dealing with racism inside operas? Everyone now might be offended by virtually everything.
Okay. Hola, Jose. It is not a matter for me of being offended. It is, because I'm not. It is a matter of the issues at stake being presented in an unacceptable way. And of course, we have this in Mexico, where I believe La Fanchula del West only recently received its premiere just because it was unacceptable. It even, if you say dirty Mexican dog or dirty Spanish dog, even getting it even worse, the audience simply could not listen to that. I don't think it's necessarily a matter of being offended. I think it's a matter of, as time goes on, you have to keep digging deeper, saying, what is this about? Like Dahlia and Terry and I were talking about, with Siegmund and Sieglinde, there is an element in which those two are representatives of a master race, but I don't think that's what it's really about in its core, and I need to keep digging until it does. And part of my digging involves not permitting everybody around me and everyone else in the opera house to say, oh, well, they're blonde Aryans. That's okay then. I'm okay with that. Well, I'm not. And I'm not going to let you be okay with that. So it is going to keep being a bigger and bigger problem. And I think that's a bigger and bigger opportunity. And it's not just about race. Like I said, my mother, my late Mexican mother, used to say, never mind the magic flute, but she felt that Brünnhilde it was painful for her to watch the process of Brünnhilde as a woman. She felt that Wagner was just unnecessarily cruel to her, the way Puccini was unnecessarily cruel to Liu, to show the whole torture scene in Turandot. Which, incidentally, Amy Tan said, that's my problem with Turandot. You can't imagine, I feel like these Chinese people on stage have anything to do with me that way, which I thought was interesting. But she said, what about Liu being that protracted torture porn going on? And that was a problem. And yeah, we're going to have to keep asking these questions and finding a way. It's like, of course, I love Turandot. I love that. I love the whole opera. So I need to find a way to make it not about torture porn. That might have to do with the production. That might have to do, let's face it, and I hadn't even thought about this until you asked the question, that might have to do with what everybody else thinks about it. That I might have to get up there as I'm paid to do, and say, no, you're wrong. It's not about that. I don't know. But it's going to keep being a problem. It's going to keep being a bigger problem, and it's going to keep being a different problem in each country. It'll play out one way in Mexico and one way in the United States and one way in Russia and different ways in different places. Certainly in China too. Yeah.
Well, that isn't Puccini's worst racism. I think that's in Fanciulla. But
so does the Mexican public, and yet as a Mexican American, I can say that also Fanciulla is my favorite Puccini opera and maybe one of my favorite operas, and I think it is flat out his masterpiece. And I think it was written by a somewhat Hispanic, Sephardic Jewish person from San Francisco. So I don't know. We need to know that, and we need to look into that, and we need to look into what the Sephardic Hispanic person Sephardic Latino person who wrote it was thinking.
Yeah. Helene Kaplan says, listen to your mother. That's just a comment.
She's not with us, but I'm still listening to her.
Yes. Okay. Kristen O'Keefe has a
Hi,
question.
Kristen.
Yeah. How do we appreciate that the inherent flaws of the human condition means imperfect people are the ones making art? And also why we as human beings need art. Why do we need art? Thank you, Kristen.
Kristen, best subject ever. Okay. One, we deal with the imperfections of the human being in the art by not hero worshiping our artists. We deal with the imperfections that we can worship them in a different way. That doesn't mean we endorse their vision, their literal vision of how things should be. That I can worship, in a sense, Virgil without believing in the divinely mandated mission of the Roman Empire to dominate everybody. It's there. You cannot read the Aeneid without it. My professor in Santa Cruz, Bob Derling, a Dante scholar, said one day he threw the book down in front of the class. He said, look, you're all going to have to deal with this one fact at some point. that this person we're setting was a misogynistic, homophobic, impero-papist son of a bitch. And it's like, okay, we're going to have to find a way to do that if I'm going to finish this text that has something in me. In other words, we need a more sophisticated way, and it's not, and it doesn't involve enshrining our artists in civic religion. The old Met had a bust of Wagner on the front. I don't need a bust of Wagner. That's not the monument I need in order to pay homage to the part of Wagner I want to pay homage to. The part of Wagner I want to pay homage to is when I go into the theater to a good performance of his opera. But the bust on the outside, get rid of it. Blow it the hell up. What was your second part of the question? Because it was good, and I want to.
Goodness, I think I marked it answered, and I don't have it. But here's one from one of my most all-time favorite people, anonymous attendee. As with racism, must we search for the Wagner in ourselves to grasp the larger meaning of his works?
Okay.
Thank you, Anonimo.
No, that's heavy. That's very heavy, because the best sermon I ever heard, and I wasn't there, but somebody told me about it, in Ireland. An Irish activist friend of mine said that at one point, this was in the 90s, he said, at a certain point, we need to stop worrying about the British Empire among us and start worrying about the British Empire within us. And I thought that must have been a very heavy thing to say in a Catholic church in the Republic of Ireland in the 1990s. And I've never forgotten it. And I think yes, I shudder to imagine how we have to do that, but I do think yes. Look, Wagner was weird. And that's the other thing. That's another thing. If you read Cosima's diaries, 2,200 pages of them, of the most soul-killing, boring crud you've ever read in your life, but it is absolutely necessary to read it. What you get is that this guy was a lot weirder and more conflicted than just to be able to say he was a racist son of a bitch and we're not dealing with him. I think, reading in there, and there's evidence to this, I believe he secretly kept kosher. He was not a vegetarian.
He was a vegetarian.
He was not a vegetarian.
Oh, I always thought he had been.
Exactly, everybody does. He advocated vegetarianism and said that this was what made the Aryans great. And, you know, a lot of people in northern India would agree with that, you know, and that a lot of the actual Aryans would agree with that. That in fact, well, never mind. But anyway, he was not a vegetarian, but there are references to dietary lapses in her diaries. And once was when he ate shellfish in Palermo, and another was when he ate salami in Siena. In other words, his dietary lapses were trafe.
Yeah, I guess so. But who wouldn't want to eat the salami in Palermo?
Separate issue.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Point being, Wagner was a freak and a half. Much more interesting than you would think.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the prodigious amount of wine that they were drinking and the laudanum and all those other things going on too.
Laudanum, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Margaret Jones has another question, and then Kristen had weighed in again. I have Margaret. I have listened to discussions by African American singers, especially Lift Every Voice on the LA Opera site, and a long discussion
great thing.
Long Beach Opera. And one point they make is that we need diverse staffing in the administration, directing, choreography in opera houses as we move forward. And I agree 100% with you. Margaret, because I'm on the board of a very small opera company, and diversity and equity and engagement of the community is absolutely at the front of our every page of everything we do. Will, what do you have to say about that?
Absolutely. And I thought I had mentioned that, so I just want to stress it again, that Morris Robinson, and I know he repeated this in the LA thing, says that and actually like talked me through it. He says, no, this is what I mean when we were talking. And he's absolutely right that that's systemic, that is not an abstraction of, well, the music, the whole country needs to integrate better. Yeah, but the systemic thinking that he's talking about means that unless an institution represents multiple points of view, what they put on a stage cannot represent multiple points of view. So he's absolutely right. And in media people presenting it, and in people making decisions, and in people making financial decisions and artistic decisions, yes, there, no question. Yes, I support it 100%.
Okay, and then Kristen, finishing up her question, and how do we appreciate that? I'm trying to remember what that was, because our condition as human beings is to be flawed, as we as humans need art. So why do we need art in the first place?
Why do we need art? Well, I don't know, but we do. And I think it has to do with, Thomas Hampson, who really is one fine thinker and a great, he supports other artists on a unique level. He's great that way. And he once said that he was kind of riffing on my idea of don't come here for the pretty music. And he said that opera is more than a performing art, more than even the supreme performing art. As he said, it was a laboratory of the human experience. I don't know why he said laboratory. He's from the West Coast, same as I am, but he's been living overseas, and he said that, and the expression stuck with me. And I think it has to do with that Athenian idea of, because the theater specifically, which was a religious ritual in Golden Age Athens, a ritual to the god Dionysus, was a necessary part of the back and forth processing of the mutual assumptions that we have to have in order to have a civilization together, right? Do we need cops? What is their role? That's not going to be answered with one question. There's a process that needs to happen with these complex equals political, many people have many issues, and they are many, going on. So politics has to have a place to be processed. And the Athenians understood that was art, and the debate around art, which is part of art, which I believe that Wagner understood dimly and taintedly in Meistersinger. That when he said, "Hier gilt der Kunst," that's what he meant. Or that's what he really meant, even though he didn't know he meant it. But fortunately, he has us to tell him that that's what he actually meant. So one of the assistants to the general manager at the Met once said, if we were a family, you would be the person in the family who would say at Thanksgiving, no, what you meant to say was, I said, that's awful. That's a terrible thing. But that could be useful in my role as a commentator. So I'm telling Wagner, what you meant to say, and that's that we need that as a place to process the ideas that have to be processed for us to live together.
Well, that is the last question that we have at this point in time. So there's still some folks. There's still some folks here. I want to recommend that tomorrow, the Wagner Society of Southern California will be having a talk by Desiree Mays with Wagner's own letters being read by Simon Williams. And I meant to do a landing slide to have all this information there, but I didn't. So, yes.
Can I do one more plug?
One more plug from Will?
Yeah. Check out williambergerpresents.com. It's all one. For the next webinar, we're going to work out some deep discounts for Northern Cal Wagner Society.
Oh, wonderful. We love
And
discounts.
also check us out on Facebook, William Berger Presents, and we'll be making an announcement. The website's going up tomorrow.
Oh, okay,
The
good.
new website,
So
you will plots when you see who's on this one.
I always plots. You told me a few things and I was just overwhelmed. Also, a week from today, we have Catherine Sire. We're going to be talking about Beethoven and Wagner, and we'll have a lot of musical examples, and she is just absolutely delightful. You'll enjoy her a whole bunch. And then in 3 weeks, we'll have Maestro Nicholas Braithwaite coming in live from Australia at a special time, because he can't do 1 o'clock because that's before he gets up. So we're doing it at 4:00 p.m. We're giving him 3 hours extra time to sleep and have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea before he comes to us. So I want to thank Will Berger. You are the best. We love you. And we'll have this up someday when I can get this technical gizmos working correctly. We'll have it up on our Vimeo site. And thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it. You're the reason why we're doing these webinars. And thank you and I hope you enjoyed them. Okay, everybody. Bye-bye.